CD Projekt Red has been one of my favorite game studios for a really long time now. They create some amazing games, they're so pro-consumer, and they're just a generally good company. I do my best to talk about them and give them the positivity that they deserve, and while CD Projekt Red has done a lot of good when a lot of companies are unfortunately very anti-consumer now, they've made a really bad move when it comes to Cyberpunk 2077. Instead of respecting their employees and standing by statements that the co-founder made last year about making sure that employees wouldn't have to go through crunch, their employees will now have to go into a mandatory heavy crunch phase only weeks before Cyberpunk's launch, and it sounds like they've been going through crunch for quite a couple of months now. I am going to be referencing a Bloomberg.com article by Jason Schreier. I'm not a big fan of Jason Schreier, but I do think that this was important to highlight, so I am using an archive of his post. Cyberpunk 2077 publisher orders 6-day weeks ahead of the game's debut. Polish video game developer CD Projekt Red told employees on Monday that 6-day work weeks will be mandatory leading up to the November release of the highly anticipated Cyberpunk 2077, reneging on an earlier promise to not force overtime on the project. Now, I do understand that there are some employees that don't really care about going into a crunch phase. They don't mind having to work overtime and having to put in a lot more effort and work, especially a couple of weeks leading up to a project. Unfortunately, though, for CD Projekt Red employees who are working on 2077, these 6-day work weeks have become mandatory. So Red, a subsidiary of Poland's biggest gaming company, CD Projekt SA, has been criticized previously for engaging in crunch, an industry term for excessive overtime in game development. The practice often lasts for weeks and can stretch out for months or even years. CD Projekt Red co-chief executive officer Martin Owinski, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, last year told gaming website Kotaku that the company would be avoiding mandatory crunch and was committed to allowing employees to work without overtime. But an account from a CD Projekt Red employee recently, as well as an email to staff earlier this week, indicate that the company hasn't lived up to its word. The employee, who asked not to be named discussing private information, and said some staff had already been putting in nights and weekends for more than a year. Now, I understand that COVID has really messed up the industry, and we've seen the effects of it on every industry, and CD Projekt Red was already in a pretty tough position because they had delayed the game from April to September, and then from September to November, so they already had people who were pretty upset with them, and they wanted to provide Cyberpunk to people as soon as possible, and I've said it for months now, I didn't think that Cyberpunk was going to release in November, and at this point, I seriously think that they need to hold it back instead of going into a mandatory crunch phase. But continuing on with the article, in the email, CD Projekt Red studio head wrote that he was optimistic about the state of Cyberpunk 2077, which stars Keanu Reeves, and they had said that they just sent the game to be certified for release on PlayStation and Xbox. Now, he wrote, it was time to fix the game's many lingering bugs and glitches. Starting today, the entire development studio is in overdrive, he wrote, elaborating that this meant your typical amount of work and one extra day on the weekend. The extra work would be paid as required by Polish labor laws, and many other video game studios don't pay for overtime. I take it upon myself to receive the full backlash for the decision, he wrote. I know this is in direct opposition to what we've said about crunch. It's also in direct opposition to what I personally grew to believe a while back, that crunch should never be the answer, but we've extended all other possible means of navigating the situation. Now, I'm someone who understands that crunch does happen, and it is pretty normal, but the problem here is, first of all, crunch shouldn't be normalized. It shouldn't happen as often as it does because companies should understand that people can only work so hard, and pushing them to their limits isn't healthy in most capacities. Yes, it does sound like they are getting paid overtime, which doesn't always happen, but this article says that the extra work isn't optional, it's mandatory. CD Projekt Red also promised us that it wasn't going to happen. Marcin Nowinski said to Kotaku last year that they were going to respect the people making the game, that they care about the well-being of the people making the game, but putting them into ultra stress mode weeks before the launch isn't healthy. I did also want to go over to a tweet that the studio head did put out, Father Gamer, head of studio CD Projekt Red. He said this on Twitter in response to Jason Schreier's article. These last 6 weeks are our final sprint on a project we've all spent much of our lives on, something we care deeply about. The majority of the team understands that push, especially in light of the fact that we just sent the game to CERT, and every day brings us visibly closer to shipping a game we want to be proud of. This is one of the hardest decisions I've had to make, but everyone is well compensated for every extra hour they put in. And like in recent years, 10% of the annual profit our company generates in 2020 will be split directly among the team. Now, I'm in agreement with a lot of the people who are commenting on this. You make video games, someone says, not the cure for cancer. Stop harming your employees' health to get a damn game released. It's just a game. Someone else said everyone is bitching about a journalist releasing that article when all workers are compensated for it. It's not about the money, it's about forced extra labor. People get fired if they don't want to work overtime for multiple weeks, and this is a very good point. What happens if you're an employee and you don't want to do work that they're saying is mandatory? You're going to get fired, and especially with the state of the world right now, everyone is feeling very uncertain about their careers, their futures in a lot of industries. I just really think that it makes this whole situation worse because we are in the middle of a pandemic. So many industries have been affected by COVID, and yes, COVID has played a huge part in the state of Cyberpunk 2077 because I'm sure those extra months that they asked for, they did lose a lot of that time, and a lot of problems probably happened in that time because people couldn't be in the middle of the studio, everyone together talking about issues, getting help. They were probably from home, and working from home does add more complications. But I do also want to say that this is another Jason Schreier article, like I mentioned, and I'm not a huge fan of him. I think that you all can guess that at this point. Schreier to the industry rescue again. But I didn't want to ignore this situation just because it's Jason Schreier breaking the news. I think it's extremely important to talk about these situations and point them out when they happen. Really hope that we see some of their employees come out and truly say, we're okay with this, the majority of us are okay with this, but it sounds like from at least this one employee that Jason Schreier talked to, there are people that are at CD Projekt Red that are not happy about having to work mandatory 6-day work weeks leading up to Cyberpunk 2077's launch. If there are any other updates to this situation, I will of course let you all know. I have been covering CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077 pretty heavily on the channel because it is a game I'm excited for, but this news just isn't good. But that's all that I had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like and share it and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you did not, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.